and check up on it. I'ma let you work up on it. Ladies, let him check up on it. Watch it while he check up on it. Come over and check up on it. I'ma let you work up on it. Ladies, let him check up on it. I'ma let you work up on it.
Stacey Abrams and attorney Francis Johnson.
Yesterday in the New York Times, and the headline was Democrats fret that Stacey Abrams struggles in Georgia's governor race, and it said that Democrats are alarmed because you're trailing Governor Brian Kemp in the public and private polls. What do you say to that article?
I would say that in the public polls, you always have to ask who are they talking to. And they're usually not talking to the electorate that I see and that I know we can build in Georgia. In 2018, I was told that I was spending too much time talking to people of color, talking to black people and brown people, talking to women, that I needed to focus on a very narrow segment of the population. I disagreed, and I had the single highest turnout of Democrats in the history of the state of Georgia. This time, we are facing a well-funded incumbent who is spending money that has been brought to the state by Raphael Warnock, by John Ossoff, by our congressional delegation. But we also are living through, we're still in a pandemic. We are still dealing with the crisis of healthcare and affordable housing. People are despondent and they're disappointed because it's hard. And so I don't expect to be where I was 4 years ago, but I expect to win this year because I'm going to work harder than I've ever worked before, and the people of Georgia I know want what I got.
How do you dispel this notion that you have a lack of support from black male voters?
So I got asked the question, and those of you who know me, I'm going to acknowledge my dad. Daddy, stand up. That's my father, Robert Abrams.
Hey, you did a great job, sir.
So my father, Reverend Robert Abrams, taught me that you answer questions head on. And the question that I got was a question about whether I needed black men's support. And my answer was, if black men turn out in their numbers and support me at the level they are capable of, I can win this election, because we know that black men sometimes punch below their weight class in elections. And they've got reasons to be distrustful. They've got reasons to be disconnected, and it is not only disingenuous, but it would be malpractice for me to not do the work necessary to show that I understand. I am not a black man, but I've been raised by one. I got two brothers-in-law, and somewhere out in the universe, a husband. And no matter who that black man is, I'm running for governor to serve the people of Georgia, and if I can prove that the work that we can do together will change the future of the state, then I am always going to say that if black men stand with me and vote for me and run with me, we can change the future of Georgia.
I got one more part to that question. What's your specific plan to engage black male voters in Georgia? Because you know black men are monolithic.
And that's, the reality is black voters are not monolithic. We are always going to look for a leader who is going to respond to our needs, and black men in particular. And so my job is to not only say what I will do, but to point out what has happened. Under the current governor, black men are more incarcerated. He has eliminated access to many of the programs that we put in place for criminal justice reform. He's made it harder to engage in society. If you were already doing okay, very few black men who own businesses got access to PPP. He did, but black businesses didn't. He has done very little to invest in our communities. When you see all of these job announcements, they're not coming to where we are. He has not addressed the housing crisis, the health education debt crisis, and he doesn't seem to care about the future of our people. And yet, if he is reelected, no matter who's elected, apprenticeships if you need them, I want to make sure we're paying for student loans and student debt so young people can go to college. I want to create a small business fund that will put $10 million into helping small businesses get contracts, but I'm also going to make certain that we move from the place where right now, the state of Georgia is 48% people of color, 33% black. Black people generate 2.1% of the business revenue. And if we stay on the path that Brian Kemp has us on, it will be 100 years before there's economic parity. I can get it done in 15 years. That's why I'm the next governor of Georgia.
21. Francis, you want to ask a question?
What's your plan to make sure that more money is put into like underprivileged communities?
Who in here works for Brian Kemp? That's what everybody can say.
I'm gonna let you keep your mic for a second. So first of all, we know Brian Amherst, there we go. Okay. Number one, we know that Georgia has one of the highest poverty rates in the nation. We have the second highest rate of people without insurance. What that means is that more of our people go into debt because they get sick. Because illness doesn't ask whether you're a Democrat or Republican or whether you can afford it or not. Brian Kemp is refusing to expand Medicaid, which is denying health care to 1.4 million Georgians, and if we expand it, 500,000 Georgians will get health care. But here's what that means. If you're working full-time right now, making $9 an hour, in Brian Kemp's Georgia, you're too rich for health care. But you're too poor to pay for it. It's because of his refusal to expand Medicaid that we're going to lose the Atlanta Medical Center, the 6th hospital to shut down in 4 years under his leadership. That means that all of us are going to be in more danger because our taxes are going to go up, the quality of health care is going to go down, and we're going to lose $3.5 billion to other states. So number one, I'm going to expand Medicaid. Number two, the reason I want to invest in need-based aid for students is you shouldn't have to be rich to go to college, and you should be able to see your way into the future. I want to invest in our young people to make sure they can get the jobs of the future. Number three, I'm going to tackle the affordable housing crisis. You shouldn't be put out of your house because you point out that there's mold. And under Brian Kemp, it is illegal for the city of Atlanta to enforce housing laws. It's illegal for local governments to do their jobs. We need a governor who believes that you have the right to live under a roof, not under a bridge. And he has refused to spend $450 million he's got right now. He's going to lie to you and say, well, I gave some money, but he's got lots of money and he's had 4 years to figure it out. My plan is to make sure that we have access to education, to housing, to healthcare, and that for those who want to start a business, especially those who are returning citizens, that they have the opportunity to start a business because they may not be able to get a job otherwise. If we have a governor who actually thinks about the least of these, then the rest of us rise because the rising tide lifts all boats, and in Georgia it will lift all people.
So one of those systems that is near and dear to my heart is the criminal injustice system. Of course, I've worked to fight to make it a fair system for all, but it seems like that black men can't get a fair shake in it. You can do anything that you want to do, first of all, because you're a black woman, but you decided to run for governor again. What is it about the governor's office in terms of being able to finally move the needle in terms of criminal justice?
And this actually goes to 21's question and Charlemagne's question. We know about the presidency. They spend billions of dollars making sure we know about what a president can do. We learn about the mayor every 4 years. But the most power in most people's lives is controlled by the governor. The state decides how much money goes into our schools, how much money goes into our prisons, how much money goes into our health care, how much money goes into our housing. Mayors get to spend the money that gets to them, but they don't get to decide what they get to do until the state decides what they can do. The governor is the most powerful job nobody understands. And because we have never had a black governor in the South since Reconstruction, we don't understand just how much power we are ceding to people who do not see us as valuable parts of society. And that is never more true than what we saw happen in criminal justice reform. For 8 years, I worked with Nathan Deal. He and I disagreed about a lot of stuff. But we agreed that criminal justice reform was necessary because when he became governor, Georgia had the 4th highest incarceration rate in the nation. We are only the 8th largest state, and we are still number 1 for probation or parole. And in Georgia, that means you can't get housing, you can't get financial aid, you can't get health care, you can't get a job. You cannot vote. All you can do is get ready to go back to jail. And so for me, this is driven by what I learned at my dad's knee. My father did prison ministry in Mississippi in the 70s and 80s. Before he moved here, just decided to come. He used to just be preaching, now he's actually a pastor. So when we moved here, I know that if we solve the challenges of criminal justice reform, we are addressing years and years of disproportionate effect on black men. When I talk about those numbers, although we're only 33% of the population, we are the majority of the incarceration. We are the majority of the unserved mental health issues. We are the reason that, unfortunately, law enforcement is the number 1 provider of mental health care in the state of Georgia, not our doctors. Those are all solvable problems, but you've got to believe that people deserve redemption and not just recidivism. And Brian Kemp does not believe that. He believes that the way to solve the problems is to track, to target, and to incarcerate. That has never solved the problem. We have never punished our way to progress ever in America, and certainly not in Georgia. And so as governor, I can restore the criminal justice reform work that we were doing. I can pursue more expansion of opportunities, including expungement of records and banning the box and making sure you get access to housing, having transitional locations, making sure we have real public defenders who are fully funded so you're not encouraged to plead guilty when you know you're innocent. We can address the issue of cash bail, not because you're dangerous, but because you're poor. And we can do all of these things with a governor who actually believes that the people of the state deserve access and service and not incarceration and being ignored.
You know, I know everybody in this room wants to vote for Stacey Abrams, right? But we know because of voter suppression, they're going to make it very, very hard. So how are you going to reverse the damage done on voting rights by Brian Kemp?
Look, unlike what we saw in 2018, this time they wrote it down. You know, in 2018, we discovered all of the policies he had pushed through over 8 years as Secretary of State. And we found a lot of them out in the last 8 weeks of the election. Francis was there with us when we were discovering issue after issue, the number of polling places that shut down, the disinvestment in our communities. What we were able to do after that election, what I had focused on, I didn't win the election, but I refused to let the broken system continue, and we made fixes to that system which made 2020 and 2021 possible. And their response, now Brian Kemp gets credit for not committing treason, but people don't pay enough attention to the fact that he extended voter suppression with surgical precision. In the state of Georgia right now, in Gwinnett County alone, 37,000 people are having their right to vote challenged. Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger just outsourced voter suppression. And we have to have a governor who will fight back. And before we get there, you will have a candidate who's actually followed the system, created fair fight to fight the system, and will do everything in our power to allow people to overwhelm the system with our presence. If we vote, we win.
Check. What about, like, I've been seeing a lot of stuff like about candidates trying to shut down studios. Like, what are you gonna do to protect, like, entertainers like me?
So I fundamentally disagree with the broad swath of approach. The broad swath approach that says that if it looks problematic, we're just gonna stop it. I have disagreed publicly with the district attorney about using lyrics as a predicate. I'm a writer. I write for a living. People wonder where my money comes from. Finally, people started buying my books. I appreciate it. Thank you all. But the reality is that we cannot thwart the entertainment industry in pursuit of justice. Now, we need justice, and those who are bad actors should be held accountable. But anytime you treat everyone as suspect until proven innocent, you are creating a chilling effect on not only the economy, but on trust in the system. And so I don't believe in that kind of blanket approach. I don't think it has ever worked. Because typically when there's a blanket approach taken, the people who have the least power to fight back are the ones who get smothered. And so that is not the approach I would take. I would take a very direct approach. I think we need to have the highest standards and the highest accountability. And those who do wrong should be held accountable. But we can't pretend that just because it looks like a duck, it might just be a really, really pretty chicken. We've got to be willing to do the right thing by the people. And we cannot quash art because we don't understand it.
So that's a really important segment, and I appreciate your courage for bringing it up. I was checking to see whether Fonnie was somewhere in the building before I came in. You know, but beyond that, the investigation of lyrics as opposed to what people actually said and did on January 6th. Can you talk to us about a real gut check moment that we're in terms of our democracy and why Georgia is ground zero for that fight?
I'm a lawyer by training, but I'm Southern by grace. And I know that in our communities, the tendency is to overcorrect, over-incarcerate, over-investigate when you are black or brown. And the tendency is to give you every benefit of the doubt, even when the evidence of our eyes says you're wrong if you're from the majority community. And that is not to cast aspersions on anyone, but it is to say that we have disproportionate treatment in the United States, and there's nothing clearer to prove that than what happened on January 6th. Let's remember, January 5th, we elected the first black man and the first Jewish man from the state of Georgia to the U.S. Senate. And nobody was talking about it on January 6th because they were storming the Capitol, threatening to murder the vice president, killing law enforcement, and holding all of us hostage to their belief that they should get to decide the future of the country. My response is this: we need to have a system of justice that actually includes us in justice. But that means we have to have leaders who see us. And the extent to which we have governors who sign all of those laws, every time something goes from being a misdemeanor to a felony, every time money comes out of the justice system and into the carceral system, that's a governor's decision. And so we need a governor who actually believes in justice, not simply in Washington, D.C., but right here in Georgia. And until we take seriously the power of the governor, then we will not have the protection of the governor when justice and injustice meet.
Speaking of protection, where do you stand on guns? You know, I believe in my Second Amendment rights. In fact, I believe a black person owning a legal firearm in this country is a form of self-care. So where do you stand on that?
Okay, so I grew up in Mississippi. My great-grandmother Lulu taught me how to shoot. She taught me two things. Number one, don't aim it at anybody unless you plan to use it, even in a commercial. But the second thing she taught me was that the person who holds that weapon is the person responsible for what happens. And in Georgia, the current governor, in order to win a primary, weakened the laws in Georgia to make it easier for dangerous people to get those weapons. By removing the permit, he removed a background check. Not everyone who wants a weapon intends harm, but people who intend harm like to get weapons. And you don't have to get them illegally when the governor makes it legal for you to have them. More importantly, for black men, the removal of that concealed carry permit puts a target on every one of you. Because when you have that permit, if they see that gun, they have to ask you for the permit and you can prove you have the right. When that permit is no longer valid, then they can presume that you are in the wrong. That is dangerous for black men, it's dangerous for black women. I believe in the Second Amendment. My dad and I have talked about his guns. I bought him a gun cap one Christmas. I know how to shoot. I don't do it as often because hunting doesn't make sense to me. I mainly eat chicken, and shooting a chicken is just mean. But I know that in the United States, and certainly in the state of Georgia, you could protect the Second Amendment and protect second graders. We shouldn't have to choose. I would repeal the permitless carry, the criminal carry law. I would repeal the guns everywhere law, where right now we've got parents on Facebook talking about people walking past their schools open carrying AR-15s, and law enforcement can't do a thing about it. They're walking past elementary schools carrying rifles. Those children are terrified, and it is illegal in Georgia for a single law enforcement officer to have a conversation about it. We've got to protect our children, we've got to protect our churches, we've got to protect our grocery stores, we should be able to go to the movies without being afraid of dying. We can have the Second Amendment and protect it, but we have to protect the people too, and that should be the priority.
Following up on that question, I just got out of a serious murder trial that dealt with stand your ground issues, and this is the application of the Second Amendment when it comes to black men being able to defend themselves, and the misapplication of that when it comes to black folks who actually do it. And so when you talk about the set of laws that you intend on repealing, and you talk about those disparate impact on African American men particularly, we stand up for ourselves within the Second Amendment, and yet, depending on who sits on the bench in some parts of this state, you don't have to drive very far outside of 285 and get to some jurisdictions where there's no person of color with any judicial authority. What's the role of the governor in making sure we have a diverse judiciary for application of the law?
The governor appoints the judges in the state of Georgia. And let's follow what he's done. In the past 4 years, this governor has had judges retire right before an election, so he gets to appoint them so that people of color don't get to vote on the next judge. He's done this in jurisdiction after jurisdiction, and he's done it at the Supreme Court of Georgia, where he has had people retire just in time to take their power. He's done the same thing with district attorneys. And if you are involved in our justice system, the two people you should have a voice in is who can charge you and who can sentence you. And the governor decides who those people are. And Brian Kemp has manipulated the system again and again with impunity. And we have seen disparate impact on communities of color. Let's think about Ahmaud Arbery. Ahmaud Arbery was dead for months before the governor of Georgia decided to pay attention to his murder. 72 days. We were doing work trying to get his attention. It wasn't until the New York Times, which sometimes gets it right, until the New York Times finally called attention to it, that suddenly the governor discovered that we had a rogue DA who was refusing to charge 2 men for committing bold-faced, broad daylight murder in the state of Georgia. He doesn't get credit for finally doing the right thing. This is a man who is coasted on falling into doing the right thing. His intention is never questioned, but he did not intend for Donald Trump to not become president. He just didn't want to break the law once. He didn't intend for Ahmaud Arbery to get justice. It took 72 days and the crying hearts of the folks of Blaine County of Brunswick to get his attention. You don't have to work that hard to get my attention because I'm already showing up.
You know, I wonder, Stacey, with all the various voter suppression laws put in place here in Georgia, does being governor actually feel like an attainable dream?
Absolutely. I'm going to answer this I think you're asking me what I'm going to do about veterans.
Black veterans.
Okay.
Veterans. Yes.
Oh, no. He was doing sign language, and I was trying to make sure I understood. But here's why. These two things are connected. Georgia has 13 military installations, but we have one of the fastest growing rates of veteran homelessness in the nation. And because Georgia had so many people in the National Guard called up, we've got a lot of folks who do not qualify for benefits. If we don't expand Medicaid, they don't get health care. We've got a lot of veterans who are being denied health care in our state. Black men who served and protected but can't get a doctor's appointment. The reason being governor feels attainable is because I got really, really, really close last time. It was 54,723 votes. But since that time, 1.6 million Georgians have registered to vote. They are disproportionately young, people of color, and they are eager for change, but they don't know they can have it. This is an attainable goal because if 5% of that population votes for me this time, I'm the next governor of the state of Georgia. But here's the thing. There's some people who are like, well, this isn't as exciting as it was in 2018. I can't be brand new every time. The first time is to get you to believe. The second time is get you to do. And that's what we need. We need folks to believe in their own energy and their own power. I need everyone for the next 60 days to talk about this election like your life depends on it, because it does. We deserve leadership that sees us, that serves us, and that believes in us. And the current governor has proven on every one of those metrics that he does not care. If he cared, we would still have a hospital in downtown Atlanta, and Union City wouldn't have lost their only ambulance and their only emergency room. If he cared, Cuthbert, Georgia would have got the same treatment that he's about to give to Grady Hospital so he can throw a rock and hide his hands. If he cared, we wouldn't be talking about the fact that he has taken away access to criminal justice reform because he doesn't believe that it's right. And he wouldn't be running commercials saying that it's a problem, that I think that maybe you shouldn't have to pay bail for being poor, you should pay bail for being dangerous in the state of Georgia. Those are conversations we can only have if we have a governor who believes we have the right to be heard. And this is a man who's made voter suppression the hallmark of who he is, and you cannot forget it.
I do a lot of financial literacy work where I'm from. Can you speak to that, like what your plans are with financial literacy?
Absolutely. So I went to the Cobb County Schools too. I graduated from Annandale long before you were a thought. But I know that I was never taught financial literacy in school. And what tends to happen is that if you don't come from resources, people presume you'll never have resources, so they do nothing to teach you how to deal with the resources. But I've also never seen anyone as economical and smarter with money than the broke person.
Right, that's a fact.
And so I want to do three things. Number one, I want to make certain that we not only create financial literacy opportunities in our schools, we have to make sure we've got teachers in those schools to teach those classes. Georgia actually does have a law about financial literacy. The problem is we haven't fully funded our schools in almost 20 years. And we've got teachers who are being asked to teach 2 and 3 different things, and financial literacy is falling to the bottom. So number one, we need to actually pay our teachers a living wage of $50,000 to start so that they can actually do their jobs. But at the same time, if you want financial literacy, you've got to pay people a living wage. That means paying our bus drivers, our cafeteria workers, and you may not clap for this, but it also means paying our correctional officers and paying our community supervision officers. And making sure that you are responsible. When you lose your freedom, that does not mean you lose your humanity. And we need a governor who actually believes that we deserve to pay everyone a living wage. And that's number one. Number two, I want to create an entrepreneur's learner's permit so that when you want to start a business, we're going to make it fast. The same way we roll out the red carpet for Hyundai and Rivian, I want to roll out the red carpet for our small business people, for those who need a little bit of help. And I want to add to that by making sure we're slashing fees. You shouldn't have to pay to start your dream. Number three, I want to create what I call the Small Business Capital Investment Fund. Put $10 million into it. Because not everyone needs $500,000 or $100,000. Some need $5,000 or $15,000. And you can't get a bank to loan you that money in Georgia right now. But the state can underwrite that and make sure that money is available. If we do those things, we not only help people dream, we help them fund those dreams and grow those dreams. And that's my intention as the next governor of Georgia. So, you know, I'm the second of 6 children, and my brothers and sisters are my best friends. We're all very different. My brother Walter has been in and out of the carceral system. And when I got ready to run the first time, I called him and said, do you mind if I tell the story of how you dealt with a heroin addiction and bipolar disorder? Because it's going to be all over the newspaper. Do you mind if I tell your story? He had every right to tell me, keep your mouth shut, this is my business. But my brother said, please tell my story. If it'll help somebody else, you tell people what happened. I've got a father who has been dealing with cancer for 15 years. And when people decided to yell at me because I was broke the last time I ran, because I went into debt taking care of my parents, my mom and dad, they had every right to say, keep that to yourself. But my parents said, tell people what you've been doing so that they know that they're not by themselves. I have a sister who's a federal judge. We don't talk very much right now because I don't want her to get in trouble. But I love her. I've got a brother who's a social worker, and a sister who's an anthropologist, and a sister who runs a nonprofit organization. And every one of my siblings informs how I think about the world, because we all come from such different spaces. But the reason I'm here tonight is that I have 2 brothers. One who's been in and out of the carceral system and is finally on his way forward, and a brother who's done nothing but try to help people, but has many stories to tell me about being pulled over for driving while black, and who has a 16-year-old son who's about to get a license, and he's going to have to worry every day if he makes it home. I count on them because I need to remind myself every day that I've got to think about both of my brothers. I don't get to pick one or the other. Everything I do has to be about how Richard and Walter make their way in this world, how they prosper in this world, and how if they stumble in this world, we lift them up. We don't step on them or step over them. That's what keeps me going.
I want to follow up on that. You spoke about speaking on your brother's story. Like, how important is it to give Black people access to mental health care? And what are the generational benefits we'll see from that?
I'm going to also acknowledge my brother-in-law, Jimmy Gardner. Wait, here you go. Okay. He's married to the judge. She's not allowed to things, but he gets to come. So, mental health care. How many of you know the story of Breanna Greer? Breanna Greer lived in Hancock County. She went to Fort Valley State University. And during her tenure at Fort Valley State, she presented with schizophrenia. By the time this story takes place, she had to drop out of school. She was with her parents. Her parents were raising her twin 3-year-olds, Mariah and Maria. Breanna had a psychotic episode a few weeks ago, about 2 months ago. Her parents did what we're all taught to do when there's an emergency. What number do you dial when there's an emergency? 911. But in Hancock County, under Brian Kemp, when they dialed that number, no ambulance was sent because there were no doctors in Hancock County. Instead, they sent a police car. Now, I'm not commenting on the legal merits of the case. I'm talking about the reality of what happened. Instead of being taken to a hospital, she was arrested for having a psychotic break. She fell out of that vehicle, got a concussion, and died 6 days later. Her children are going to be raised by their grandparents. And her father, Marvin, said, if I had known that they were going to arrest her, I never would have called 911. But in Georgia, the #1 provider of mental health care is not our hospitals, it's our jails. It is law enforcement. And we cannot solve that problem unless we expand Medicaid in the state of Georgia, because the people who need help can't pay for it if they don't have insurance. If we expand Medicaid, the insurance comes, and when there's insurance, when someone can buy your service, more people provide the service. We are number 48 in the provision of mental health care because we don't have enough people here because they can't make a living here. But if we expand Medicaid, they will be able to come here, they will be able to make a living here, and when you call 911, they can can send a mental health responder, not a law enforcement officer, to save your life instead of taking you to your funeral home. That's the kind of leadership we need on mental health care. But we also need it in our schools. Right now, our schools are supposed to have one counselor for every 250 people. It's one for every 432. And in some counties, there's one therapist who basically goes through multiple counties. If we expand Medicaid and we fully fund education, we can pay for counselors. But we also have to stop treating our children as little bad adults and start treating them as troubled young people who've lived through more crises than any young person should ever have to experience. And the current government does not have a plan to make certain that our young people, especially our young black men, our young black boys, let's not make them men, our black boys, when you get upset, you should be expelled, you should be embraced, and we should be working with you. That's not the system that we have in Georgia.
You make sense for everything you say, and you're a black woman, so it's like, I don't think there's no better candidate than that. Secondly, I think like, me being here, there's a lot of people in Georgia that's like me, that might pay attention a little more, you know, and I like you, so, you know.
Where's our next question? Okay.
How you doing, Stacey Abrams? My name is Portia Miller. I went to Georgia ASCP State Conference, and I'm one of your elite communities here in the Atlanta metro area. So I want to talk about veterans. I'm a U.S. veteran, Army, and my husband is a U.S. Marine. And we both suffer from mental illness. I myself suffer from mental depression disorder and military sexual trauma, which causes a lot of depression. Thank you, Francis Johnson. And my husband, he suffers from PTSD. He's a non-combat veteran. The thing I want to know is, when it comes to the criminalization of marijuana, and I have a card, but it's not enough for me to even apply for any flower here in Georgia. But as a black woman that knows how hard it is to deal with the society here in the Atlanta area, and to be a fighter and a former activist, what would you do to help us legalize the use of cannabis, not only to help the veterans, but to also help children like my grandson that suffers from autism?
So the question is about legalizing marijuana in Georgia. So let me tell you where I stand. I voted for legalizing medical marijuana in Georgia. I'm deeply concerned about the business process that was followed to let those contracts, and the fact that too many people of color were not allowed to fully participate in the process. And it is deeply problematic that, given that we are a state that is 33% people of 33% black, 48% people of color, that those contracts did not have the same equity in their distribution.